Do you have a minute for Comadre time?
Hola Comadres, welcome to another episode of Comadreando podcast. I'm your host Marcy, and today we have an amazing guest. His name's Terence, and I will let him introduce himself. Who are you?
Yeah, so my name is Terence Lester, and I am residing in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm actually a native of Atlanta, Georgia, and I am the executive director and founder of a nonprofit organization called Love Beyond Walls.
Amazing. So I started following Terence because I kept getting notifications for the inspirational quotes that he was posting regarding disabilities and being visible in the community. And that's how we followed each other. I decided to reach out and, I wanted his story on our show to kind of share with parents and other community members. So today's topic is facing adversity. And the reason why the topic came up is that, your story is one of adversity. And I love how you have been able to, with the help of your family and your community, kind of face that adversity and grow as an individual. So before we get into the topic, I wanted to ask you, what is your profession?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for your platform and talking about sensitive subjects such as these. But I would say my profession is I am an advocate. I am a executive director and nonprofit leader, and I also am a writer and I'm a public speaker. So I've been doing that for leading a nonprofit for about a decade, and I've been being a public speaker and writer for a little over 15 years.
That's amazing. So, what made you decide to pursue that career? And I mean, like in the avenue of advocacy, what made you become an advocate? Like, what was it that you saw in your community that made you feel so strongly about that you wanted to speak out against it, or, lend your voice to the cause?
Yeah, so I would, when I'm asked this question, I'm always very vulnerable in that advocacy for me did not happen as it relates to like anything hobby related or some type of trend. My advocacy work grew out of personal pain that I experienced in my life. The thing that I'm advocating for is something that I also overcame myself. So we advocate on behalf of those who are unhoused and marginalized and excluded from criminalizing ordinances and or mistreatment from larger society. And so I experienced homelessness when I was a teenager. I know what it's like to sleep in parks, to be overlooked, to not have someone fully understand the context of your story and how you arrive in a certain place. And so it kind of grew out of this notion of pain, something that I struggled through, and then gaining access to like people who would become my community, like my friends' fathers, and kind of speak to me about my future and what I could become. And, educators who kind of got around me and poured into my life in a way that gave me some semblance of hope. I think the second phase of that became more education. I saw education as a way to not only be aware of the realities structurally that vulnerable communities face, but also it gave me a way to imagine myself in places that didn't have violence or harm, right? I use books as a way of seeing myself beyond my environment and the gaps that I had in my life. And then I would say thirdly, because I'm a person of faith, it kind of, my heart was just kind of wired to say, like, how can I use my life in a way actively to make a difference in the world. I've been pained by this. I see this contextually, in whether it was written articles or books that I was reading, and I see it visibly in my community. But then I started to ask myself, like, how can I actually make a tangible difference? And that's when I started exploring different ideas about how I could start an organization and possibly leverage my story to advocate, but also to educate others who have not been proximate to communities that have been oppressed.
That's amazing. Coming from the inner city, because I'm in New York City. I don't know if you know, but coming from New York City, and coming from an impoverished neighborhood, it's really, like, it's very shocking to see people that are unhoused still, and to see people in your community that are at the borderline almost of becoming unhoused, So the work that you're doing is like, it just really touches my heart, because it honestly, sometimes you don't know how to help or what to do. And it's so easy to judge and point the finger and like assume the worst of people for, for being in those situations, which a lot of the time they don't even have control over, really. So it's like, the education piece I love, and also the advocacy piece as well, to be able to affect change and change legislation regarding the unhoused. It's very powerful. So I wanted to switch gears a little bit. I know that you experienced an accident that was basically life changing for you recently, and I wanted you to talk a little bit about that. I mean, as long as it's not triggering for you, and kind of walk us through what that experience was like and how it changed you as a man.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for giving me a space to share my journey. I remember it was May 13th. My wife and myself were invited to this gathering to celebrate young professionals, and kind of our organization was being highlighted in a way that would just kind of honor the work that the organization has done on behalf of the unhoused. And it was like a celebratory moment. And so we go, and the organization was highlighted, and people were made more aware of like the struggles of those who are unhoused. And so we left, and the very next day, we told our friends, and we were like, hey, let's go out to dinner and just kind of celebrate this moment, because sometimes when you achieve something, the normal thing is to move on to the next thing
Mm-hmm.
and not really relish or like savor the moment. And I think we do a very horrible job with that in society. But we go out to dinner, and we're leaving dinner. It was around 11 p.m. and I asked my wife if she didn't mind driving, and she agreed. And I fell asleep in the passenger seat. And the next thing I know, I wake up on the ground, um, and there were EMTs running over to me, and I could hear like people yelling, like, flip him over to see, it's check his vitals to see if he's still alive.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of blacked out again. And then I came to, and I saw my wife running towards me. And the next thing I know, I wake up in the hospital with, doctors telling me that they were going to have to perform like emergency surgery on my leg and my hip, because my hip and my pelvis were crushed. And I was like, what type of surgery? And so they had to put a pin in my lower leg to pull the femur forward and put weights on it, because it was close to my nerve, um, like damaging it severely, and close to an artery. And so, yeah, they operated, and then I was scheduled for surgery the next day, and then they operated again. And I spent a month in a hospital. I remember when I found out that it was just going to be a long process, and like I would have long-term effects from this injury. The doctor had come to me after surgery, and he was like, "We had a successful surgery," and I was like, "Oh, okay." Because in my mind, I'm thinking like
That's it.
I'm
You're
just
done.
gonna, that's it. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm done. And he was like, "No, we're gonna have to keep you." And I was like, "Keep me?" And he was like, "Yeah, it's gonna be a while before you can walk again." And
Oh my God.
yeah, that kind of crushed me. Like I not crushed me in the way where it's like it was just shocking, right? Like it was like your life is moving in a rhythm that you're accustomed to, and then something disrupts that and it reorients everything. And so I went from being oriented to disorientation, which is something that became like a huge blow for me.
Yeah.
I remember after being in the hospital, like it was a community hospital, so a lot of people who don't have insurance access that hospital, unhoused community, because it's the number one hospital in the whole state for trauma,
Okay.
specifically the injury that I had. And when I was admitted to the hospital, I remember hearing around me at night, like people yelling out, "Somebody help me. Why aren't you giving me my medication?"
Oh my God.
There were times when I was ghosted by nurses and like had my medication stolen, and not like giving me my medication and going through that pain. And the irony of like being an advocate for people whose voices have been silenced or like impoverished, and then also going through the mistreatment um, of like how it literally feels, whether you have no insurance or like however people view you,
Mm-hmm.
or like or insurance, it did not matter. I was just in this environment where the mistreatment was a part of the culture.
Wow.
um and it was very toxic, and like I was trying to fight to get out. Like my wife had to get involved and like advocate for me and different things. And I started to think about the number of poor folks who haven't been taught to advocate for themselves, or never even had that space to know what it feels like to advocate for yourself, or even having people to advocate on your behalf,
Yeah.
and feel that connection. And so it was just like a really hard journey, starting that process. I spent 26 days in the hospital, and then another week or so in inpatient care before I was able to come home.
Wow. That must have been like some experience. As people of color, we go through so much with the medical system, but then like on top of that and being in that type of hospital, like I can sort of imagine a little bit like what your experience was like, but it's really at this day and age it shouldn't be happening, but it still is, which is so powerful that you're talking about the advocacy piece, because I through my platform, I'm also educating parents about advocacy for their children with special needs. And not only that, but also like even mothers that are pregnant, that are in the hospital, that they're dealing with, the medical system. A lot of things go fly under the radar and are permitted in hospitals that should not be permitted. And then the thing is that the education piece is missing because a lot of people don't know what their rights are.
Right.
Your doctor can plan a course of action, but you are entitled to tell them no, and you can advocate for yourself. And if you don't like your doctor, you can always advocate to switch hospitals, doctors, whoever. Obviously you have to advocate for yourself, and it's not just going to happen like easily, but
Right.
you are always in the right. You can always change your care, and that's something that I really wanted to harp on, that you mentioned. um so
Right. Yeah. I think what you're saying is so important because, most times people who hold any type of, specialized role are deemed as people of importance and people who have power. Um, but just because a person has a role of importance doesn't necessarily mean that they have power over you,
yes.
is what you're saying, that you have the power to decide what doctor you go to, what doctor you allow into your space to walk with you through your journey,
Hmm.
what doctor you choose to advise you on medical standings, etc. And I think sometimes when people, are struggling with poverty, um, we tend to defer, our rights and, our voice to those who we deem as more powerful. But
Hmm.
we got to remind folks that, you're just as powerful,
Yes.
and resources does not dictate worth. You know what I mean? Like we all have, worth no matter what social location we emerge from.
Yeah. And whether you have private insurance or Medicaid, or you don't have
Right.
any insurance at all, you still have the same rights as
That's right.
anybody in the hospital.
That's
So,
right.
how did this experience shape your opinion about disabilities and the rights of people with disabilities in the US? I feel like that's something that there have been so many legislate there has been so much legislature to defend disabilities, but I feel like there's still so much that needs to be done. And the fact that people are still dealing with this is to me is like crazy. But just like kind of tell me, how has it shaped your opinion about the rights of people with disabilities here in the States?
Yeah. Well, I mean, personally, I've always been an advocate of any uh, persons that have been excluded or oppressed in some way. Personally, my son has um, a disability, and so my heart has always been open to um, creating space
Hmm.
and margin for people to be their full selves the ways in the ways that they're um, of, able or afforded to. And I think you know I've always like it's been sensitive to me because it's
Hmm.
my own child, and um, me and my wife, we have walked alongside my son and honored him in the ways that he has been created beautiful, right?
Hmm.
Um, in his expression of his life. And so I guess my heart is just like as a father has always been like, wanting to see people who are living with a disability shine, right?
Hmm.
In a way that is honoring to them. But personally, after the accident, I started to really make the connection of how people value, like how people place worth on ability, like ability to show up, ability to keep a schedule, ability to do certain tasks,
Hmm.
ability to speak, ability to go here, ability to go there. And I started to see how people almost disconnected or, stopped talking to me as much because I wasn't able to perform those abilities. And it was very heartbreaking.
Ugh.
Um, and it all in many ways it caused me to question my own worth in the beginning because it was like am I worthy? You start having these questions. Um, like my worth beyond what I'm able to produce, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so like I really struggled with that. And then I was reminded by one of my professors about how my worth had nothing to do with whether I was in a wheelchair or not,
Yeah.
whether I was using walkers or not, whether it took me longer to do something or not, whether I needed to rest my body longer than I had before or not. My worth was just here because I exist, I'm breathing,
Yes.
and people love me because of that. Um, but it was a struggle because there were times when I would go out in restaurants. I remember this one time I was out with my family and I was using my walker. I mean, I'm literally trying to learn to walk again, and the
Mm-hmm.
doctors are not knowing if they need to do a third surgery. And this lady and her kid was just like looking at me, and the mother was like making faces, like mocking me, and the kid was they were laughing at me at the table, and I remember my kids were there, and like
Oh my
I just broke down, and then I started to realize like every building does not have ADA accommodations where it's like you know trying either whether it's walking through doors or like the restrooms or like access and seating or whatever it was. It's just like it was a new world that opened up to me because I'm literally walking in what it means to live with a temporary disability,
God. Hmm.
and it was just eye opening. Yeah.
That's such a powerful experience, and like kind of shifting your mindset from being completely able to do all these things to now having limited mobility and being looked at differently because you are now using a walker or crutches rather, to move around. And the fact that that lady had the audacity, like, it just
Yeah.
really grinds my gears. And then the thing is that a lot of the time when people are disabled, they are seen as invisible by other people. And that's one of the things that I really want to drive home with my show is that even though somebody does something differently than you do, that person is just as valid, just as worthy, just as powerful, if not more
Yes.
so than that as you. So especially like with a lot of the time, I work a lot with children with autism, and there's some children that are nonverbal, right? They're not able to express themselves. They don't have expressive language. They do have receptive language. They understand everything that's going on. But the fact that because they can't speak, people disregard them as a human, as an individual, they don't take them into account. It just drives me crazy because it's like, this is another human being. How is it that you're not really looking at that person as a person? And I feel like that kind of goes
Right.
a little bit hand in hand with the way people look at the unhoused as well, because it's like, they marginalize these people, and they set them to the side and disregard them in a way in society.
Right. Right. And it's like that invisibility piece, like invisibility strips a person from um having an expression of their existence, um heard or seen or embraced or included. um and I think we have to like redefine how we create belonging for people
Yes.
living with a disability. To I'll never forget the first time I went out. Like my wife uh, helped me load the wheelchair, and we went to a coffee shop. And I hadn't been in this coffee shop in a while, and I remember riding past this guy who was unhoused, and he had a like a walker and a wheelchair, and I made my way over to him, and we were talking, and he was talking about how the walker was not the right size, the wheelchair was not the right size. And, on top of like living
Yeah.
with a disability, you're also discarded as a human because you are unhoused. And my heart just broke. And I really resonate with what you're saying, is that we have to create counter narratives, right? To challenge the status quo narratives or the dominant narratives that persist and continuously make people see others as being less than or invisible, when in reality, there are people who are living with a disability and or unhoused that are just as capable, just as worthy, and just as important as any other person who has ability.
I love that. Thank you so much for saying that. So, I mean, I know why and why you chose to work with the unhoused, but was there anything else, like besides coming from that experience in your teenage years, was there any other experiences that stand out, like as a child or, later on in life, that made you create this beautiful organization, Love Beyond Walls?
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about invisibility, like I guess I'm a person that just feels deeply. I know what it feels like to be overlooked. I know what it feels like to be uh, deemed a black sheep or an outcast. I know what that translates into, like
Hmm.
sociologically, being excluded from certain things, and the feeling of the experience of homelessness, uh, like you know, can be translated into so many other experiences. And I guess
Hmm.
I guess the challenges that I faced coming up just kind of prepared my voice and my outlook on life, um, and just prepared my heart like to serve. And I just didn't want to. I didn't want to just like chase capital, like what I mean, like a bunch of money. I wanted to contribute
Yeah.
my life in some way. I'll never forget. I was about to turn 17. I was in an alternative school, and I just made the decision to drop out of high school. I'm walking away from the school with my friends, and I'll never forget this guy who was experiencing homelessness called over to like our little crowd or whatever, and I was the only one to respond. And so I turned aside. I walk up to this guy. He didn't ask me for any money or anything. He just asked me, is that your school back there? And I was like, yeah. He was like looking at himself up and down. He told me that I should, whatever you do, he says, whatever you do, young man, make sure you get an education, because you don't want to end up like me. And he didn't know at that time, like I was like living out of my car. I just contemplated like dropping out of high school, all of these things. He was just kind of like speaking into my life. And he was the first person to call me a leader, right? A man on the street, right? And that always stuck with me. And that conversation was one of the reasons why, I graduated. I went back to school. I graduated, and pretty soon I'll finish my PhD, and yeah,
I love
my
that.
whole like dissertation is centered around the criminalization of homelessness, social and political rhetoric, social constructions, how we speak words and create frames in which people like see others through, similar to everything that you're talking about. And it just became like a passion to me, because I just have a passion to make sure that those people who feel invisible, right, have a home. And what home is just more than four walls and the roof, right? Home is where you're seen, where you're accepted,
Yeah.
and where you feel like you belong. And so, like my life's passion is just to create more belonging for folks who are overlooked.
I love that. Creating more inclusive environments where everybody feels seen and heard and valued as a human being is so important. Wow. I love this. So so Love Beyond Walls does so much. Can you like highlight some of the initiatives that you guys have worked on throughout the years for the
Yeah,
audience?
we've done anything from housing people in mobile RV units, helping people transition. I think we've helped a little over 500 people get off of the streets. We've been known for doing national campaigns, like the one in the pandemic that we did when everybody was talking about like washing their hands. I came up with the concept of putting hand washing stations like in the streets and under bridges, and that kind of spread from Atlanta to all around the United States. I think it's in I think 89 cities or so where people were having
Yeah, I
having
saw that on
access
your
to
website. That's
sanitation.
amazing.
We built self-contained showers. We launched a museum that's educating folks around the subject of homelessness. We've done food co-ops, clothing closets, free access to washing machines. I mean, um, like the mobile makeover bus where it's like a mobile barbershop. I mean, I can go on and on and on, but I think one of the things that I would like to highlight is that all of those things that I've named are just vehicles to be in relationship with people. Because for us, it's always been about relationships, getting to know the person, getting to know their story, their hopes, their fears, their dreams, their shortcomings, and wrapping their lives with like community, like providing a community for them. Because as you said earlier, like there are not a lot of people who have access to communities where they feel like they fully belong, right? And so, like Love Beyond
Yeah.
Walls has always just been a organization trying to figure out how can we take excess to solve a problem, like excess, like you got RV units sitting around and there's nothing being used. You got a bus that's not being used. Like we can transform these into like spaces and places that provide or meet these needs of individuals who are just as worthy. Um, but it's also been about bringing people together, which is, I mean, it emanates from like my pain and my life story. A bunch of people who were strangers at the time became family to me. Uh, saw my worth and value beyond my circumstances, and so I'm just trying to live that out personally, and we're trying to live that out through our organization.
Awesome. So, can you share some of your most memorable moments during while you've had this organization during the program?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about. I remember one time we launched this museum in 2019 called Dignity Museum, and it's the first museum in the United States that represents the subject of homelessness. It's housed in a shipping container, and we were leading these tours, and a person had come into the museum, and they're like looking at the stories and pictures on the wall and the screen and listening to audio recordings and all of these things, and the person actually ran and like found their aunt because our organization had worked with their aunt, and we were able to reunite them. Um, yeah,
Oh my
there's other
God.
times when you know um, I remember this one individual who's a friend had been out of touch with their family for 30 years, and we had a volunteer like come in to like just donate an hour a week, um, and they ended up meeting, and the volunteers like, well, I have a skill of research, that's kind of like in my profession, my wheelhouse, and I want to use this to help you find your family. And the volunteer actually ended up helping this person find his family, like after 30 years. Yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
God, I love
I
that. Oh,
mean,
yeah, yeah. It's funny because, like,
no,
sorry,
I
go
was
ahead.
just like reunification stories, like people going from living behind buildings or in cars to like having like adequate housing. I mean, it's just all about people, really. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say that it's that is like something about Twitter, right? Like, I wanted to say that through Twitter, like the you see the power, right, of people coming together. Not that necessarily that what's happening with Twitter right now is like the best thing ever, right? But you see the power of people. When people unite, you know, we can do so many things, and I feel like those
Right.
stories are a testament to that, coming together as a community, as as human beings, and seeing each other and holding space for each other is so impactful, that things like that can happen, which is amazing, because the thing is, like, we feel like the world is so big, but it's really through connections with people and talking to other humans, the world
Right.
becomes a little smaller, which
It's
is
so
dope. I
dope.
think it's so
And,
dope.
you know, the point that you're making is about the world being small is a really huge point. And I think, to add to what you're saying is you also have to be open, right? You have to be open to meet new people, to have new experiences, to pursue new opportunities, um, and open to like lend your voice to advocating for whatever it is, because, and I'm not trying to like encourage people to like erase their boundaries, because I think boundaries are healthy, but I think there's something to being open in a way where you can be a part of like this collective that you're talking about.
That's awesome. So, what has been some of the major impacts that you've seen in the community? And you guys are in Atlanta,
Yeah.
Georgia, yeah? So what has been some of the impact that you have seen in the community? I mean, I love that hand washing station idea. That was like, when I read it on your website, I was like, wow. But what other things have you seen through the community, or like even personal, not personal, but like small stories of people that you guys have worked with that you have seen like a turnaround in their
Yeah.
lives?
Yeah. I mean, we've seen a lot of change. I think in any major city, there's a lot of change when it comes to the unhoused community. There's it goes from like growing interest to solve the problem to, oh, let's put boulders under bridges and like place hostile architecture everywhere, right? And so like there's this ebb and flow of um, how this community is being perceived, which is, it's heartbreaking, but it's also like motivating to be more of an advocate in the community. Like I remember during the pandemic, we saw like hotels being occupied, right, and space being created for the unhoused community, which funding and stuff kind of ran out, and people started to transition back, which is the downside of that. But personally, as an organization, we've seen a lot of people that we've been able to work with, like one on one. I remember a family of 7 um, reached out to us and was like living out of their cars like this time last year, right? kids going to school and they were using coats for blankets in their car the night before. Um, Mother and father like doing the best that they can in two cars, trying to like keep their family unit together because for the mother and the children who are of age could stay in the shelter, but the whole situation of shelters not accepting whole families. I mean, it was it was hard, but our organization was able to walk with them through many of those challenges where they are actually able to get stable housing. I can tell you stories like I remember meeting a good friend of mine now behind a building. Um, he was once in corporate America, ended up, experiencing homelessness, and he's looking for something to eat in the garbage bin behind our facility. And instead of calling the police, I kind of befriended him, learned his story, and our organization kind of walked with him out of the experience of homelessness. It took us 8 months to secure his birth certificate because you need ID to get ID. And we had to get an attorney involved and all
Yes.
those things. And I'll never forget, we launched a campaign called Hire Mark, where I wore this big sandwich board um, downtown, and it was on the news, and like his resume was shared like thousands of times. And within 6 days, he got a job offer, and so that launched him back into the a tech career. Um, and yeah, and then he got his own place, and then Mark just literally got married and relocated to Louisiana last year. So yeah, during that whole process, he was able to reunite with his daughter. It was just, I mean, many different stories I can tell you on and on, but I, I don't want to share those stories to say, look at what we're doing. I'm sharing those stories because I think it's important to know that with the right community, um, people can achieve anything because it's in them. It's not in us. What we have the opportunity to do is just like create space for people to be their full selves.
Even the language that you're saying our organization walked with them. It's not like you're like, have this savior syndrome, right? That you're like, oh, we're here, Superman, we're, taking care of these people and we're just saving them. No, you're walking with them, which is very powerful. Like when I think about the Bible, remember the quote
Yeah.
about the footprints in the sand, right? You're walking with them to help them get themselves back to, a situation that is gonna be conducive for them to be able to thrive, right? So I even love like the language that you have around that. So I wanted to ask you a little bit. I wanted to dig a little more. So your organization is so special. I know that you have to have some kind of like secret formula to hire people to work in your organization. So what is it that you look for when you're looking for people to be part of the staff of Love
Yeah.
Beyond Walls?
I think that's, thank you for asking that question because it's reminding me of, like, I'm sitting in my office right now and I have whiteboard next to me. I remember the day I wrote this question on the board, like, what has pained you in your life? And it was inspired by a chapter I had read in
Mm-hmm.
the book. And it was written by Dave Gibbons. And in the chapter, he says, um, sometimes God will use your greatest pain to lead you to your destiny. And so, like, I'm really like reflecting on
Mm-hmm.
this question. And I remember listing all of the things that I mentioned earlier, like Black Sheep and Outcast. I mean, personally, those are the things that I felt like I feel pain around. And I'll never forget
Mm-hmm.
saying, like, if I ever became a leader, like, I just want to do things from my heart. Like, I want to I want to make sure that people feel important, that their stories are heard, not with like the hurry up and tell me kind of mentality that we have these days, or not with like the attention deficit where we can't pay
Mhm.
attention to someone's story because we're ready to move on to something else. Like really allowing people space to like be themselves in that moment. I wanted to do things with like a servant's heart, and I'm naming these things because like most times when I meet people, that's what I'm looking for. Like, do you want to just do this because you want attention, or do you really want to do this because it's in your heart, right?
Mhm.
Do you want to do this because
Yeah.
you want to be seen, or do you want to do this because you understand that there's somebody vulnerable and have been made to feel invisible that needs to be seen, right? Um, I'm looking for people who have qualities like, you know, sacrifice, like not sacrifice in a way where it becomes like toxic to yourself, where you just constantly putting yourself on the altar of things, but like, are you willing to go the extra mile in a way that makes a person have their inherent worth and value affirmed? Um, it's the small things like,
Mhm.
are you willing to do, you know, something that may not be as glamorous, because that's kind of like in my heart
Yeah.
what I think of a leader. Like I'm looking for leaders who are countercultural to what we think a leader should be. Like I don't think about leadership in terms of like, oh, I just want to be seen. It's like I think of it as in the way of like I just want to serve. Like I'm looking for like people who have servants'
Yes.
hearts as opposed to like people who only want to have power and acclaim and all those things, because that's not how I started. You know what I mean? And I want to keep
Yeah.
that in the heartbeat of like the culture, long after I'm gone. So
I love that. So I wanted to ask you, what do you envision for Love Beyond Walls in the next 5 years?
yeah, right now I have a lot of ideas about where I would like for Love Beyond Walls to go. But I think I'm truly honoring the space I'm in as a leader, going through my healing journey in terms of like recovering. Like I can tell you, like I would like for the organization to create more educational awareness and advocacy for the unhoused community, but also expanding that to people who are living with disabilities and are also unhoused. Like being really specific about that,
Yeah.
because I don't think there's enough educational awareness around that. Um, and like continuing to lead the charge to create more like innovative initiatives to advocate for housing rights, not just here in Atlanta, but all across the country, um, and even globally. And you know, I would like for the organization to also think of ways to develop more leaders who are like servant leaders that are empathetic. Because you can be a leader, you don't have to have a huge platform. Like you can make change right in your community. But most people are sometimes afraid of that. Like we were talking about earlier when you said you got to use your voice. You got to advocate for yourself. There are people who have
Hmm.
been oppressed by like systems and structures, or even uh, being oppressed by impoverishment, that don't necessarily see themselves as leaders. And so like,
Hmm.
really creating space for people to find their sense of worth in leadership in whatever capacity that is. Um, yeah. So I'm thinking and I'm dreaming, and you know I'm healing as well.
I love that. So I know you do so much, right? You're a family man, you're a dad, and you're a husband. So what does self-care look like for you? What do you do to pour back into
Yeah.
yourself?
I do a number of things. I go to therapy. I think therapy is important. I create space early in the morning. Right now, whether it's physical therapy and or like pool therapy. Um, I like spending time in the gym.
Mm-hmm.
I like talking to people like you, who's you know in the throes of like creating educational content and ensuring that people are learning, but also being aware of others around them. I like laughing with my family, watching movies, and doing things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think self care isn't cookie cutter either, because there are times when like there are things that work that are filling my tank up, and I feel like very full that aren't like working other times. Like I remember there was one time when
Yeah.
I used to ride my bike in the morning, and I got a lot of fulfillment out of that. And then I think Ahmaud Arbery happened, right, where his life was taken, and it was like,
Yeah.
you know, sometimes being in black and brown skin, you can feel like unsafe in your body, especially when you experience racialized trauma like that. And so, like, I had to transition to something else. But the next thing I transitioned to, which
Mm-hmm.
was like being physically in a gym, which I felt safe, um, created more, fulfillment and all those things. So I think, even if someone is listening to this, I think you don't start with a full plate. You just kind of gradually try things out until you find what fits you.
Yeah, I love that. And it's important to listen to yourself, right? Like listen to what you need at that
Yes.
moment, right? Um,
Yes. Yes.
Sometimes it doesn't have to be going out and doing things. Like to do self-care, you don't necessarily have to spend money. It can
Yeah.
be anything,
Yep.
like reading a book at home. It's just taking that time for yourself and being mindful in the moment. Terrence, I wanted to ask you, if you don't mind, what is your son's disability?
Uh, I didn't even talk about it with my wife, so I don't want to share, and she's not. Yeah. But
Okay.
yeah.
That is honorable.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so yeah, uh, and I don't want our recovery process to be triggered in any way. Yeah, so
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so definitely I love the fact that you guys are letting him be him and that you're allowing him the space to be an individual and you're supporting him in his journey. Everybody's journey as a parent of a child with special needs is different. My journey has been, there's certain things that we can find that are similar in our journeys, but like everybody's journey is as an individual, as a parent, is very different. So I
yeah.
respect that. But I'm gonna end the show how I always end it, which is follow me at Comadreando Pod on Instagram, and you can follow Terrence at Love Beyond Walls on IG. Yes.
Yep. Love Beyond Walls, or I'm Terence Lester.
Okay, great. And if you have any questions at all, please feel free to send me a Comadre-Gram via email at marcy@comadreandopod.com or slide up into my DMs. I want to thank you, Terrence, again for being on the show and being so vulnerable and so open and sharing your experience with everyone. And I'm with that, I want to say good night and thank you for spending time with your comadre and your compadre.
Thank
Good
you.
Do you
night.
have a minute for comadre time?